Hello everyone and welcome to my November 2017 haul video. Welcome back to another haul video. This is a very special month. I think I'll probably say that about several of these videos, but this one particularly is special because there are a lot of things to go through. There were several sales happening in November. Black Friday, the 50% off Criterion sale at Barnes & Noble, plus whatever other things just happened to pop up to be on sale. Let's get into it because this could be a long video. First up here, let me delve into the only non-movie related thing that I picked up, and that is a comic book of Volume 1 of Justice League, which is the first several issues from the New 52 run that started up way back in 2011, and I picked this up specifically because I was waiting for an omnibus to come out of these issues or of this entire run, but so far nothing other than an absolute edition, so I thought I would pick these hardcovers up before they become even more rare than they already are. And coincidentally, I actually won the auction on eBay for this right before I sat down to watch the Justice League movie in theaters. And if you're curious what I thought of that movie, I do have an individual review already up on my channel. Next up, I guess you can say, is the non-special sale of the month portion of my video, and these releases are all of the Studio Ghibli films that are essentially these great Japanese films that have been coming out for decades now. Most of the most well-known ones have been done by the great Hayao Miyazaki, and while all of these films have been released before by Disney, a company called G-Kids as well as Shout Factory have teamed up together to reissue these films on Blu-ray. Not the entire run of Studio Ghibli, hopefully I'm saying that right. Please excuse my mispronunciation if I'm not. But it's not the entire run of the Studio Ghibli line, but most of the well-known things. Things that I think a lot of you will probably have heard of or probably fans of. In no particular order, here are the releases. Princess Mononoke is actually my favorite Hayao Miyazaki film, and I just think it's one of the greatest animated and just films ever. Next is a film I actually hadn't seen, and that was Porco Rosso. Kind of underrated, or an interesting film. I definitely recommend it for people who haven't seen it. Next up is the only non-Hayao Miyazaki re-release that they've done, and I believe they've only done 10 releases so far, and they are going to be doing, I believe, 5 more sometime next year. And that is The Secret World of Arrietty. I actually haven't seen this film yet, but I'm looking forward to watching it. Next is Kiki's Delivery Service. Definitely a nice, great kids film. Kiki is a very interesting character. Next is one of the most beloved films from Hayao Miyazaki, and one that I actually hadn't seen up until I bought this release, and that is My Neighbor Totoro. Seriously, I wish I had a Totoro in my life just to hang out with and have a great, fun, adventurous time. Next up is probably Hayao Miyazaki's most well-known film other than Princess Mononoke, and that is Spirited Away. I don't know what else I could say about this film that hasn't already been said. It is amazing. It is just an extraordinary film. I highly recommend people seeing this. Next up is Ponyo, which is kind of Hayao Miyazaki's version of The Little Mermaid, or the Hans Christian Andersen story of The Little Mermaid. A very sweet and very nice film. And next is a film I haven't seen yet, and that is Howl's Moving Castle. I've heard amazing things about it, and I can't wait to watch it. The next two films are some of the earlier films in Hayao Miyazaki's career, and that is Castle in the Sky and Nausicaa Valley of the Wind. Nausicaa is a film that I had watched previously. I really like this movie. I think it's very underrated in Hayao Miyazaki's filmography. A lot of people don't particularly hold it in high regard. Here we are getting into the Black Friday sales, and of course also Cyber Monday. The only thing I picked up on Cyber Monday, actually, is a new Back to the Future trilogy set The reason why I picked this up is that this came out a few years ago and has a lot more extra features than the original Blu-ray release that I got many, many years ago, and also has a much better packaging style. I'm going to be doing a full Back to the Future trilogy video along with a fellow YouTuber, Signa Cruzman, and we are going to really delve into Back to the Future and why we love it so much. I'll probably show this set off more in that video. Next, I have just a litany of Blu-rays that I'm just going to read off because there are so many. First up here is A Cure for Wellness, A Monster Calls, Eddie the Eagle, which I thought was a very underrated film from last year. Hidden Figures, which was a very critically acclaimed film from last year. Next two here are a pair of MCU films. I'm glad I waited until Black Friday to pick these up because they were heavily marked down in price. That is Spider-Man Homecoming and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Next up is The Beguiled, Sofia Coppola's newest film. I'm a big fan of Sofia Coppola and all her work. Live by Night. It's based on the Dennis Lehane novel of the same name. Next up is Fences, starring Denzel Washington and Viola Davis, in which Viola Davis won her much-deserved Oscar for. Next is The Martian, which I got the UHD/4K edition of because I'm really starting to prepare for the inevitable 4K transition that I'm going to be making rather soon. Next is Live by Night, a film that I actually saw in theaters and had planned to do a review for but never got the chance to do it. Next up is a film apparently I and only a few other people actually really liked, and that is Guy Ritchie's King Arthur. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I really liked how different it felt from any of the other King Arthur films that we've gotten so far. Next is Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Now, this is the newest film in the Harry Potter franchise. There is a sequel that will be coming out sometime next year, I believe. As you can see, this is the UHD/4K edition. Interestingly enough, this was actually shot in 4K, and the master was done in 4K, it was edited in 4K, so this is probably going to look quite stunning on a 4K display. Next is an animated film, and I don't pick up a lot of these if you've been following this series of videos, and that is How to Train Your Dragon 2. On Black Friday, I believe this was about $4. I couldn't pass this up. This was my favorite animated film the year it came out. I thought it exceeded its original film, which I thought was excellent as well. I highly recommend checking out the How to Train Your Dragon series. It's a nice change, and it feels different than a lot of the Disney and Pixar stuff that so many people are used to seeing. Next is a film that wasn't exactly one of my favorites or most well-reviewed of the year, but I had to get it because I have to get all of the films of this particular director, and that is Alien Covenant. This is a film that had a lot of hype going into it, and it disappointed me for several reasons, but I did a full review, so you can go check that out if you want to know what I really think. And similar here is an okay film, and that is Sully, which is directed by Clint Eastwood. This is an okay film. Tom Hanks is great in it. Next is kind of a fun monster film in this new monster Godzilla universe that Universal is doing, and that is Kong Skull Island. The way I typically sell this film to people is it's Samuel L. Jackson versus King Kong, the movie, and that's kind of a great selling point to me. Now we transition to the grand finale, the big moment of this video, and that is all of the stuff I picked up in the November Criterion sale at Barnes & Noble. I didn't pick up quite as much as I did back in July. I was actually still feeling the financial burden of all of those things I picked up back in July. So here we go. First thing being up here is probably my most anticipated of anything, and that is the adaptation of Othello done by Orson Welles. I never thought that this would ever see the light of day. They had a lot of trouble finding a good print of this film to actually work with. Fortunately, some collector somewhere, I believe, unearthed one, and we have this film beautifully restored, and I love Orson Welles' Shakespearean adaptations. They are unlike any of the other Shakespearean adaptations that we've seen, and there have been quite a few of them. Next up here is Michael Haneke's The Piano Teacher, an interesting film from a very interesting director. If you've seen Michael Haneke's films, they are truly unique in tone and unique to his personal vision. Next up is a film that I'm actually really glad they decided to release because it is already on Blu-ray, but there are no special features and the restoration is just okay. And that is Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon, one of his several masterpieces in my opinion. It's a different film, it's a period piece. It's shocking if you know the making of this film, where they used all natural lighting, including candlelight, to light some scenes. Just uniquely Stanley Kubrick. Next up is Olivier Assayas's Personal Shopper. This goes right along with his previous film Clouds of Sils Maria, which also starred Kristen Stewart. This is actually one of my favorite films of 2017. Although it did come out last year, I believe, in festival form, it's really more of a 2017 release. Next up was a surprising re-release. For those of you who don't know this, originally Criterion had this film put out on DVD, and it has been long out of print. And that is Rebecca by Alfred Hitchcock. This was actually his first American film in Hollywood. And it is interesting that this and Foreign Correspondent are his only two films that have been nominated for Best Picture, and they came out in the same year, and they're both put out by Criterion. So I was just so glad to upgrade this. There's already another Blu-ray out, but this one definitely looks much better. And next is a film I've been waiting pretty much 6 or 7 years to come out on Blu-ray, and once this did, this was one of the first things I grabbed while I was at the store, and that is Vampire by Carl Theodor Dreyer. This is an amazing silent film, and also it comes with a rather thick booklet as well, which also they did with the DVD release from years and years ago. I'm glad they kept that continuous, because sometimes they don't do that. Some of the extra books that they include with some of their earlier DVD releases, they don't duplicate when it comes to their Blu-ray re-releases. And next up here is a film called The Lure, which is a very fascinating Polish art house mermaid horror romance film. It's definitely unique in all of its aspects. I would definitely check this out if you're more curious for an interesting art house film. Next up is Barcelona, which is part of a trilogy of films in the 90s that were put out by Whit Stillman, the other two being Metropolitan and The Last Days of Disco. So I would highly recommend checking those out, as well as this one. This, I believe, is the middle film in that trilogy. Next up is a much anticipated Blu-ray re-release, and that is Jean-Pierre Melville's Le Samurai. This is an incredible and amazing French neo-noir from 1967. Watch this movie if you are a fan of noir, because it's a combination of several things and it is great. Next up is The Philadelphia Story by George Cukor, starring Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant, and Katharine Hepburn. This had already been released on DVD. No Blu-ray had come out yet, so when they announced this, I know I was excited. This is right from 1940, right in the golden age of Hollywood cinema. And last, but certainly not least, is Mike Leigh's Meantime. This was a film that highlighted the socio and economic times in England under Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. This is an interesting film. It's a film I think you need to watch from that perspective to really appreciate it. It's one of those films that on the surface may be about nothing, but underneath is about everything that's going on at the time. And I've always been a big fan of Mike Leigh and his films, and several of them have come out through the Criterion label. So that has been my entire November 2017 haul. Once again, if there is anything that you want to see in more depth, please let me know so that I could perhaps discuss it with you or make a video about it. But if you like this video, please check out the other videos on my channel.